You're trapped. Miles from safety. No escape route. Your food is rotting. Disease is spreading faster than wildfire through your ranks. And outside your crumbling walls? Thousands of warriors who just obliterated the most powerful army in the world? This isn't a nightmare. This was reality for 1,100 men in the heart of Zulu territory in 1879. While history remembers Rourke S. Drift as the ultimate last stand, a single night of heroic defiance, there is another story. A longer, darker, more desperate saga that unfolded just miles away. For 10 brutal weeks, a forgotten garrison fought enemies that couldn't be killed with bullets. Starvation, typhoid, dysentery, and the psychological torture of isolation. This is the story of Eshowe, where survival wasn't measured in hours, but in agonizing days that felt like years. Where the real enemy wasn't charging across the battlefield, it was crawling through the trenches, festering in the hospital tents, and eating away at the minds of men who wondered if rescue would ever come. Welcome to the forgotten siege that tested human endurance beyond imagination. January 1879. Southern Africa. The British Empire, drunk on its own power, had picked a fight with the wrong kingdom. Sir Bartle Frere, the British High Commissioner, had manufactured a crisis. He'd issued impossible ultimatums to King Cetshwayo of the Zulu kingdom, demands designed to be rejected. The goal? Provoke a war, crush the Zulus, secure British dominance in the region. The plan seemed foolproof. Modern rifles versus traditional spears. Disciplined redcoats versus savages. Quick, decisive, and glorious. Lieutenant General Lord Chelmsford orchestrated a three-pronged invasion strategy. 3 columns would converge on the Zulu capital, Ulundi, like a tightening noose. The coastal column, number 1 column, fell under the command of Colonel Charles Pearson, a solid, if unremarkable officer. His mission was straightforward: push into Zulu territory, establish a fortified supply base at an abandoned mission called Eshowe, and wait for the other columns to catch up. Simple. Clean. What could go wrong? Pearson commanded a diverse force of roughly 5,000 soldiers. British regulars from the Buffs and 99th Regiment, a naval brigade hauling artillery and the revolutionary Gatling gun colonial mounted infantry, and 2 battalions of the Natal native contingent. Local African troops whose loyalty was constantly questioned. Behind them stretched an endless wagon train, hundreds of civilian drivers struggling with oxen and supplies through impossible terrain. On January 12th, they began crossing the rain-swollen Tugela River. It took 2 exhausting days just to get everyone across. Once in Zulu territory, paranoia set in. Every night, they formed defensive circles. Every hill could hide an ambush. They were being watched. They could feel it. And they were right. Zulu scouts shadowed their every move, invisible in the landscape they knew intimately. King Cetshwayo wasn't going to roll over for the British. He de-divided his forces strategically. The main army of 20,000 warriors would deal with Chelmsford's central column, while a smaller but still formidable force of 6,000 would handle Pearson. On the morning of January 22nd, everything exploded. Pearson's column had camped near the Nyazane River. Scouts spotted a handful of Zulus on a distant ridge. It looked like a minor scouting party. A company of the Natal native contingent was dispatched to drive them off. It was a trap. As the NNC crested the ridge, the earth itself seemed to come alive. The ridge erupted with thousands of Zulu warriors, their war cries splitting the air, their shields forming a living wave that crashed downhill. The NNC panicked. They broke and ran, abandoning their European officers to face the onslaught alone. Down in the camp, Pearson reacted instantly. Within minutes, his forces formed a defensive line. The Naval Brigade rushed their cannons and that terrifying Gatling gun to high ground with clear sight lines. What followed was a masterclass in firepower. The Zulu charge met a storm of lead. Martini Henry rifles fired in devastating volleys. Artillery shells tore through their ranks, and the Gatling gun, that mechanical demon, spat death at an incomprehensible rate, cutting down warriors by the dozen. For all their extraordinary courage, the Zulus couldn't close the distance. They fell back, leaving 350 dead on the field. British losses? 10 killed, 16 wounded. Pearson had won. His confidence soared. The myth of British military superiority seemed confirmed. But on that exact same day, 60 miles away, the entire calculus of the war was being rewritten in blood. January 23rd. Pearson's column reached their objective. The Eshowe Mission Station sat on a plateau nearly 2,000 feet above sea level, a cluster of brick buildings including a church, schoolhouse, and residence, all surrounded by gardens and orange groves. A little piece of European civilization dropped into the African wilderness. Tactically, it was a nightmare. Low hills surrounded them on 3 sides, all within rifle range. But Pearson's men were riding high from their victory. They immediately began fortifying the position, digging trenches and building earthworks. On January 25th, feeling secure, Pearson made a fateful decision. He sent a convoy of empty wagons back to the river for more supplies. It was a routine order. Those men would be the last to escape before the walls closed in. 2 days later, January 27th, a messenger arrived with a cryptic, chilling message from Lord Chelmsford. Ignore all previous orders. Do whatever you must to save your column. Be prepared for an attack by the entire Zulu army. No explanation, no context. Just a warning that something catastrophic had happened. The next day, another runner brought the full, terrible truth. On January 22nd, the same day as Pearson's victory at Nyazane, the main Zulu army had annihilated Lord Chelmsford's central column at Isandlwana. Over 2,300 British and colonial soldiers slaughtered in just a few hours. Entire companies wiped out. The camp overrun. Bodies mutilated according to Zulu tradition. It was the greatest military disaster in Victorian British history. A shockwave that would reverberate across the entire empire. For Pearson's men at Eshowe, the news was devastating. They weren't the victorious spearhead of an imperial conquest. They were abandoned, isolated, surrounded. The main army was gone. The Zulus, fresh from their stunning triumph, could now turn their full attention to this isolated garrison. Pearson faced an impossible choice. Retreat? It meant a 40-mile fighting withdrawal through hostile territory, pursued by an emboldened enemy. He'd have to abandon his wounded and most of his supplies. It would look like a rout, possibly encouraging a Zulu invasion of Natal. Or stay, dig in, and pray that somehow, some way, a relief force could eventually reach them. He gathered his officers. The debate was brief. The decision was unanimous. They would stay. They would transform this mission into a fortress. They would defy the Zulu kingdom, no matter how long it took. The Siege of Eshowe had begun. And from that moment, everything changed. The leisurely pace of work vanished overnight, replaced by frantic, desperate energy. Captain Warren Wynne of the Royal Engineers took command of the fortification project. A brilliant, driven officer, Wynne understood that every man's life depended on the strength of these walls. Under his direction, the mission transformed. They marked out a perimeter roughly 200 yards by 50 yards, enclosing the church and key buildings. Every available man grabbed a shovel. They dug a deep, wide ditch around the entire perimeter. The excavated earth became a 6-foot-high rampart on the inside, reinforced with sandbags, biscuit boxes, anything that could stop a bullet or spear. Thousands of firing positions, loopholes, were cut into this wall. The church became the central stronghold and hospital, its windows sandbagged, its tower serving as the primary observation post. But Wynn's genius went beyond simple walls. The ground outside the ditch became a carefully designed killing field. They wove dense barriers of sharpened branches called abatis. They strung wire entanglements to trip attackers. Most diabolically, they dug wolf pits, deep holes with sharpened stakes at the bottom, disguised under thin layers of grass and earth. Any Zulu assault would have to navigate this nightmare maze while under constant fire from thousands of rifles. Finally, they cleared the field of fire for 800 yards in every direction. No cover, no concealment, just open ground where attackers would be utterly exposed. As they worked, Zulu forces gathered on the surrounding hills, up to 5,000 warriors commanded by local chiefs and one of King Cetshwayo's half-brothers. They watched. They waited. Cetshwayo had learned a brutal lesson at Rorke's Drift, where waves of Zulu warriors had been massacred attacking a fortified position. His orders were clear. Don't attack. Surround them. Cut them off. Starve them out. For the first time in the entire war, a force armed primarily with traditional weapons was successfully besieging a British position equipped with modern rifles and artillery. Fort Eshowe was complete. Now came the hardest part: waiting. As January became February, the grim reality of siege warfare set in. This wasn't the dramatic, adrenaline-fueled heroism of Rorke's Drift. This was monotony, misery, a slow, grinding test of endurance against enemies that couldn't be defeated with rifles. Outside the walls, the Zulus maintained their patient blockade. They'd learned their lesson about frontal assaults. Instead, they employed psychological warfare. Zulu marksmen, some with rifles captured at Isandlwana, would sneak into position and take pot shots at anyone who showed themselves above the ramparts. At night, war cries echoed from the hills. Sometimes taunts. "We're coming for the king's cattle," they'd shout, referring to the garrison's livestock. The sound effects were designed to shred nerves and prevent sleep. Pearson occasionally organized raiding parties, as much to combat boredom and maintain morale as to gather intelligence. But the real enemies were inside the walls. The rains came in February and never stopped. Fort Eshowe transformed into a swamp. Thick, sticky mud was everywhere. Most men slept under wagons on the soaked ground. Nothing ever dried. Boots rotted. Uniforms fell apart. The constant dampness seeped into bones and souls. Then came the hunger. Rations were cut immediately. Standard biscuits turned green with mold in the humidity. Salted meat began crawling with maggots. As one soldier later recalled, "We ate what we could stomach. The biscuit went fuzzy and green. The meat squirmed. But we ate it anyway, because the alternative was worse." Tea, sugar, and tobacco, the three comforts that made military life bearable, ran out within weeks. Foraging parties risked sniper fire to collect wild vegetables. Eventually, they slaughtered the oxen, then the horses, then the mules. Nothing was wasted. Every scrap of meat, every internal organ went into the cooking pots. But the worst enemy was disease. In the cramped, filthy, waterlogged conditions, sickness spread like wildfire. Dysentery struck first, violent, debilitating, humiliating. Then typhoid fever. The small church hospital overflowed. Men lay in rows on the damp floor, shivering with fever, too weak to move. Medical supplies, especially the crucial quinine for treating fever, ran out fast. On February 1st, a private died of illness, the first disease death. He wouldn't be the last. Funerals became daily occurrences, often conducted under long-range Zulu fire. The sick list swelled. 50 men, then 100, then 200. The garrison was literally wasting away. Men grew skeletal. Their skin turned pale and papery. Their eyes sank into hollowed skulls. As one officer wrote in his diary, "We bury men almost every day now. The hospital is full. We've run out of medicine. The rain never stops. I wonder if anyone knows we're still here. I wonder if rescue will come at all." The psychological toll was immense. Unlike Rourke's Drift's intense but brief night of combat, Eshowe offered no heroic crescendo, no dramatic release. Just day after day after day of waiting, suffering, and dying slowly. Then, in early March, a flicker of hope. A lookout spotted flashes of light from a distant hill, a heliograph, a mirror flashing sunlight in Morse code patterns. Someone was trying to communicate. The relief force, 22 miles away, was trying to make contact. Frantically, men jury-rigged their own heliograph using a shaving mirror and telescope lens. Communication was established. The message: a relief column was being assembled. They would march on April 1st. For the exhausted, disease-ridden garrison, it was salvation. A reason to hold on. A light at the end of the tunnel. But could they survive until then? Back in Natal, Lord Chelmsford was a broken man. Isandlwana had destroyed his reputation. Newspapers in London were calling for his head. His military career was in ruins. But before he was relieved of command, he had one chance at redemption: rescue Pearson's garrison. He assembled a powerful force, over 5,600 men, heavily armed with artillery and multiple Gatling guns. There would be no mistakes this time, no risks, no chances. On March 29th, the relief column began its advance. Chelmsford, haunted by Isandlwana, moved with excruciating caution. Every night, they built heavily fortified camps. Progress was agonizingly slow. By the evening of April 1st, lookouts in Eshowe's church tower could see the flickering campfires of the relief force just 10 miles away. Hope surged through the garrison. They were so close. But King Cetshwayo had one final card to play. He'd sent a massive impi, roughly 12,000 warriors, including veterans from Isandlwana, to intercept and destroy Chelmsford's relief force before it could reach Eshowe. On the morning of April 2nd, Chelmsford's column was camped near a place called Gingindlovu. As morning mist lifted, an officer peered through his telescope at what he thought was a dark line of bushes on a distant ridge. Then the bushes moved. "Impi," the scout next to him whispered. The Zulu army attacked, attempting to encircle the British camp exactly as they'd done at Isandlwana. But this time, Chelmsford was ready. His men were entrenched. Their ammunition was piled high. Their fields of fire were clear. And when the Zulus closed to within 300 yards, the British unleashed hell. Disciplined volleys from thousands of rifles, thunder from multiple artillery pieces, the mechanical slaughter of Gatling guns spitting death at impossible rates. For 20 minutes, the Zulus charged with extraordinary courage, but courage couldn't overcome mathematics. They couldn't break through. When Chelmsford saw the attack falter, he ordered his mounted troops to charge. The battle became a rout. Over 1,000 Zulu warriors lay dead. British casualties: 2 killed, about 50 wounded. From their hilltop fort, Pearson's men could hear the distant roar of battle, see the puffs of cannon smoke. With breathless anxiety, they watched through telescopes, not knowing the outcome until Pearson himself managed to signal the result to Chelmsford before the general fully understood his own victory. The path was clear. The next day, April 3rd, the relief column began the final march. As they approached Fort Eshowe, the pipers of the 91st Highlanders began playing "The Campbells Are Coming." The sound drifted up to the fort. Men too sick with fever to stand crawled to the ramparts. Others, hollow-eyed, emaciated, barely recognizable as the soldiers who'd arrived in January, lined the walls. As the relief column marched through the gates, grown men wept openly. The siege was over. 70 days, 10 weeks of hell. They had survived. The relief force was shocked by what they found. These weren't soldiers. They were ghosts. Skeletal, hollow-eyed men in rotting uniforms, their faces etched with trauma that would never fully heal. Of the roughly 1,100 men trapped in Fort Eshowe, approximately 80 had died. But here is the crucial detail that history often overlooks. The vast majority, around 25 of the 28 buried at Eshowe, died not from Zulu weapons, but from disease. More would die in the weeks following their evacuation, their bodies too weak to recover. Lord Chelmsford decided Fort Eshowe served no strategic purpose and was too difficult to supply. He ordered its immediate abandonment. On April 6th, the combined forces marched back to the Tugela River. That night, they looked back and saw the sky glowing red. The Zulus had set fire to the abandoned mission. Among the casualties was Captain Warren Wynne, the engineering genius whose fortifications had saved everyone. Worn down by exhaustion and constant labor, he'd fallen ill during the siege. Too weak to march, he was carried in a wagon. He died on his 36th birthday and was buried on a hillside overlooking the river he first crossed in January. So what did it all mean? Strategically, the Siege of Eshowe achieved almost nothing. It was a holding action that ended right where it started, a tactical stalemate. But its significance went far beyond tactics. In the aftermath of Isandlwana, the single greatest military disaster in Victorian British history, the story of Eshowe became a beacon. It proved that British forces could endure, could hold out against impossible odds, could survive when completely isolated in enemy territory. For over 10 weeks, a small garrison had tied down thousands of Zulu warriors who might otherwise have reinforced other fronts. And while Rorke's Drift gave the Empire its heroic one-night stand, Eshowe gave it something different. Proof of sustained endurance, of unglamorous determination, of the ability to survive when there's no dramatic climax, no glorious charge, just the daily grind of staying alive. The Siege of Eshowe reminds us that in war, the greatest battles aren't always the most famous ones. Sometimes the truest test of courage isn't charging into gunfire, it is waking up day after day in mud and sickness and fear, not knowing if help will ever arrive, and choosing to hold on anyway. It's the forgotten epic of the Anglo-Zulu War. 70 days that pushed human endurance to its absolute limit. And now you know the story. This is just one of countless forgotten stories from history. Tales of endurance, survival, and human resilience that deserve to be remembered. What other overlooked sieges, battles, or moments of history should we explore? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. And if this story moved you, share it. These men endured 70 days of hell. The least we can do is remember them for 10 minutes.